हिंदुइज्म एंड अमेरिका बहुत ही बढ़िया बुक है जो लिखी है जय बंसल जी और कल्याण विश्वनाथ जी ने। इस बुक को पढ़ना इसलिए भी हम सब के लिए बहुत ही इम्पॉर्टेंट है क्योंकि ये इतिहास है हम भारतीयों का, हम हिंदुओं का अमेरिका में। और मेरी कोशिश होगी कि अपने शो के राही इस बुक के बारे करीब हर महीने 2-3 बार आपके साथ चर्चा करूं। इसके जितना कंटेंट है वो बहुत बढ़िया है। 3 पार्ट्स में ये बुक है और कल्चरल हेरिटेज की बात करती है ये बुक। हाउ हिंदू थॉट इन्फ्लुएंस्ड अमेरिका, उसकी बात होती है। पर्सपेक्टिव्स ऑफ कंटेम्पररी हिंदू अमेरिकन, इसकी बात होती है। और फिर उनके आगे चैप्टर्स हैं। ये बुक मेरा जी चाहता है कि ऑडिबल फॉर्म में भी हो, हिंदी में भी हो। और इसके साथ साथ इस बुक को जब आप पढ़ेंगे, आप देखेंगे, हम आपको स्क्रीन पे इस बुक को लिंक भी देंगे ताकि आप उसको बाय कर सकें। जब आप इस बुक को पढ़ेंगे तो आपको एहसास होगा कि इस बुक का जो पिक्टोरियल जो ग्राफिक काम है उस पे वीडियो डॉक्यूमेंट्रीज बनना चाहिए, क्योंकि ये एक सिंपल बुक नहीं है बल्कि इतिहास है। ये सिर्फ इतिहास नहीं है बल्कि डॉक्यूमेंट्रीज है, डॉक्यूमेंटेड कर दिया है जय बंसल जी ने, कल्याण विश्वनाथ जी ने। मैं इन दोनों का स्वागत करता हूँ। अमेरिका से हमारे साथ जुड़े हुए हैं। स्वागत जय भाई आपका। कल्याण जी, वेलकम टू ज्वाइनिंग अस टुडे। वी आर वेरी ग्रेटफुल फॉर बोथ ऑफ यू टू स्पेयर योर टाइम। मैं आपसे बातचीत शुरू करता हूं जय भाई। आप ज़रा हमसे करीब बैठे हुए हैं न्यू जर्सी में, कल्याण जी ज़रा दूर हमसे बैठे हुए हैं, लेकिन उनकी बातें भी हमारे लिए बहुत इम्पॉर्टेंट हैं। इस बुक को लिखने का ख्याल आप दोनों के मन में कैसे आया?
जी 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 ताहिर भाई, पहले तो मैं आपका शुक्रिया अदा करना चाहता हूँ। आपके व्यूअर्स को मेरा बहुत बहुत नमस्कार। और आपका शुक्रिया अदा इसलिए करना चाहता हूँ क्योंकि ये किताब जो है, बुक जो है, एक्चुअली बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है हिंदू अमेरिकन, हिंदू कैनेडियंस के लिए, ताकि वो जाने उनका, यानी कि ये एक्चुअली कहानी उनकी है, ये उनका इतिहास है और उनका इतिहास है और उनके पूर्वजों का इतिहास है, जिन्होंने मतलब है कि हिंदू संस्कृति को यहाँ लाए और उसको बढ़ावा दिया, उसको आगे, यानी कि यहाँ उसकी जड़ें यानी कि बनाई इस धरती पे। तो इसलिए सबको ये जानना जरूरी है। तो आपका सवाल ये है कि हमारे मन में इसका ख्याल कैसे आया। तो देखिए, ऐसा है कि अगर आप देखें, हिंदू अमेरिकन्स जो भी, मतलब लेटेस्ट वेव ऑफ इमिग्रेशन ऑफ हिंदू अमेरिकन्स is about 50 years old in this country. First generation people like me, and I don't know when you came to this country, but our journey started in 60s or early 70s for some of us, and so we are reaching that half century mark, or we have reached that half century mark. And this is what is remarkable about this half century of Hindu presence in this country, whether it's America or Canada, is that we came actually with very little money in our pocket. We did not have material resources, but we established ourselves financially. We raised our next generation to be very responsible citizens of these of North America, and in addition to that, it is remarkable the level of contribution this pioneering generation has made to their adopted societies. So you reach this 50-year mark and you look back and you say, look, these are wonderful accomplishments. It is unprecedented for any immigrant group if you look at the history of immigration. So there is a story here that we felt needed to be told. Okay. And of course, this pioneering generation now is reaching in their mid to late 70s, some of them 80s, and so on and so forth. So we felt this is the time to do it, so that we can pay a tribute to them before they leave this earth, and also leave a legacy, of course, for the next generation to really read about their journey and their contributions, so on and so forth. So that's how it got started. Um, and I can tell you some concrete things, and maybe you want to take it in some different direction, but I can elaborate on that if you like a little bit further. Kalyan, do you want to add something to that?
Sure.
Ji Kalyan ji, welcome, and your dedication and commitment towards Hindu Dharma is remarkable. And we all South Asians, and especially Hindus of all backgrounds, appreciate your contribution towards Sanatan Dharma. So, as Jay Bhai was mentioning about the journey of this book, and we also have a subtitle, How Hindu Dharma Transforming the West. That transformation is very important, and you are the vital part of that transformation. So, how would you like to comment? What is the book about? You are the author of this book.
Yeah. So, the story of how Hindu thought has slowly come into America and diffused into various parts of various segments of American society. It's a very interesting story. It did not happen suddenly. It did not happen due to any one single individual. It happened wave after wave after wave of people coming in with their ideas and thoughts. Different gurus, swamis, acharyas, artists, musicians. For example, the way the yoga has taken over the West and become part of Western life is really quite unprecedented and could not have been predicted. Nobody could have predicted how much yoga would become popular in the West and so on. So there is a very clear absorption, diffusion, and adoption of Hindu ideas, concepts, practices, values, even though they may not be recognized as Hindu, and they are slowly getting assimilated into this new category called spiritual, but not religious. A lot of people here in the West today, they say we are non-denominational, we are spiritual, but not religious. But really, if you see what they are doing, the practices they are adopting, vegetarianism, veganism, introducing meditation and yoga in their lives and so on. It is a slow process of diffusion of Hindu ideas and thought into Western culture, and we thought we should speak about it in the form of this book in an easy reading kind of style. So that's the genesis of this book.
No, this is absolutely worth reading book. Kalyanji, I would like to know more from you. How did you get started on it? Describe the journey of how this book came into being.
Yeah. So, there was a conference held in the year 2018 called the Threats Conference. In fact, Jay Bansal ji was involved in the organization of that conference. In fact, I would suggest maybe Jay ji should talk about the conference first, and then I'll speak a little bit after that. Jay ji, why don't you take that up?
Sure. Thank you, Kalyanji. As I was, in fact, intimately involved with that conference. It was actually November 2019, and the idea that I started with, that Hindu Americans have been here for about half century, and we want to talk about their contribution. That actually, Tahir Bhai, was precisely the reason that conference was held. Our initial idea was simply hold the conference, bring some, thought leaders from the Hindu diaspora here, and let them talk about their journey and their accomplishments and their trials and tribulations. And so we held the conference in Boston. It was a very successful conference. We had some 60, marquee speakers from all over, North America. In fact, you were one of the invited speakers, as you may recall. so the conference was held, and that was very well, it went very well. So our thought was, okay, let's just document the, whatever was said at the conference. Let's try to summarize that so that we can, leave this conversation for posterity for the next generation. So we started working on that. And, that was done relatively easily, fairly early. But, once we looked at, the product of that, we said, well, that looks pretty empty without actually having some idea of what these people actually, what they brought here that made these accomplishments possible. Just saying, we did this thing is not good enough. I think you have to say, what you are as a society, as a culture, as a civilization, as people. So, so we decided to talk about the cultural heritage of those who came here with basically empty pockets, but very rich, upstairs in their heads, in their cultural, stamina, if you like. So we wrote, various aspects of that, cultural heritage. And quite frankly, at that point, we thought, okay, the book is done. But then we realized that, we are really picking up the story, almost, midway in its journey, because reality is, Hindu thought has been here a lot longer than Hindu Americans have been here. If I could say it that way. The translated copies of our scriptures traveled here in late 18th century. After William Jones certainly discovered Sanskrit, and people started translating. You have people like Ralph Waldo Emerson, picking it up, and Thoreau and some of the other people getting into it. So Hindu thought was spreading here for that long. And there's some really nice quotes in the book that I'd like to point to at some point in our conversation. So we realized that we really have to write from the very start, which is, how Hindu thought actually, got to these shores, and then how it got, planted here, how it got transmitted, and then adapted by the people here, and in some cases changed quite a bit, and in some cases, in some cases they'd even denied the source, but nevertheless, the thought the thought continued to live on. So we said, okay, that part of the journey also has to be written. So that's how, this entire book came together. I think finally, we said, okay, I think now we have a reasonably complete history of Hindu thought and Hindus in America. So at that point we said, okay, this is the book, and we move on.
You said that finally we have something concrete in our hand. And Kalyanji, I would like you to continue what you were saying. So about the journey of book, what would you like to say more about that?
Yeah. So when we started contemplating, the movement of Hindu ideas, Hindu thought, Hindu concepts, Hindu practices into the United States of America, we had to go back in time a little bit. And we started doing some basic research on this. And we started looking at who are all the key contributors, who brought what to America, and who received it on the American side, who are the recipients, and how this thought moved from India to here. And what we noticed was there were three distinct phases of the movement of thought. The very first phase, a few books started coming to America. A few Sanskrit texts were translated, they were brought here. The early American transcendentalists like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau and Walt Whitman, they started reading some Sanskrit texts. They read Bhagavad Gita, some Upanishads, and so on. And on their own, they began to develop an appreciation for Hindu thought and ideas. At that time, there were no Hindus here. There only the texts had come. You fast forward a little bit, the first big visit in America was Swami Vivekananda's arrival here in 1893 at the Parliament of Religions in Chicago. And that was a watershed moment because he started talking a lot about yoga. He started talking about the 4 types of yoga: Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Raja Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga, and so on. And that was a very critical moment. And as you move forward, then there was Paramahamsa Yogananda who came here and set up the Self-Realization Fellowship. You move a little bit forward in time, you got all the other major stars who came in, Swami Satchidananda, Swami Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and on and on. So many people had come and contributed their thought here, and it got mixed. And on the receiving side, there were many, many people who were very receptive to yoga and made it their own. So I think that's the second phase of the transmission of thought. Of course, the third phase is when we all came here, bringing our culture and traditions, started building our own temples, started our own activities, and so on. So there's been you can think of it in 3 phases, how this transmission has occurred. And we thought we will document all of that. So that is how this book sort of expanded beyond the conference and acquired a larger backstory, so to speak.
So Jay bhai, what drove the timing of this book?
Yeah, good question. I think it was really this realization that the first generation Hindu Americans are here for half a century. So half a century is a sort of a good point in time to look back and say what that journey has been like, all their trials and tribulations and great accomplishments and so on and so forth. So that was kind of the driving thought, but also remember, 50 years means the pioneering generation is now reaching their, is in their golden years. So if you want to write their history, and you have to tap into their that resource before they leave us. And quite frankly, we're at least I'm part of that generation. So it's we just felt that this was. The other thing is, of course, our next generation, they're grown up. First generation is certainly grown up, and the next generation is grown up, and they are now into into their years when they need to be able to relate to their forefathers' story in some way, and be able to pass it on to their children. So we just felt that this was just the right point in time for us to take a pause, take a look, and say something about it in a cogent fashion. The other thing is, we could have written a tome, 200 page, 300 page, thick text that sits on bookshelves, and hardly anyone reads them, except few dedicated individuals. So that was not the game we, really the way we wanted to do it. So we decided to do it in a coffee table fashion, where you have a lot of pictures that draw people in, but then there is a text that goes with it that gives that sense of history, that flow of time and flow of events. So every time you open a book, even if you engage with it for 10-15 minutes, it is our impression that you will find something new and interesting more than one thing, I'm sure, but you'll find something new and interesting even in 10, 15 minutes, which you won't get in a large, deep thought textbook. Or so that was the timing and a little bit, the format of the book.
Right. Kalyanji, is this book strictly about Hindu thought in America, or is it about the entire Western world? As the claim, as the subtitle suggests, how Hindu Dharma is transforming the West. How do you support the subtitle with the title?
Yeah, that's a very bold subtitle, right? It is actually making a claim that Hindu Dharma is transforming the West. And how is it happening? Well, is it happening, really speaking, right? So when we look at that question, one of the things that has become very clear is that, the West was founded on principles of Christian thought. Christian thought that originated from Europe, and within the Christian world, there is a sense that there is one truth, and that has to be upheld through Jesus. And other paths, other religions, other traditions are somehow not as true as the Christian truth. In fact, Christianity has this strong notion that non-Christian traditions are invalid in some way. Now, the increasingly Americans are embracing the view that maybe that's not the case. Maybe there are many paths to the truth. Maybe there are many ways, many methods, many traditions, and a lot of different traditions, sampradayas, to use a Sanskrit word, can actually coexist. Now, this coexistence of sampradayas is a very foundational idea in Hindu Dharma. And Hinduism has always promoted such a vast variety of traditions and cultures, subcultures, sects, and so on. As America embraces its role as a kind of a melting pot or a salad bowl, as they say, different traditions come and maintain their respective traditions and identities in this salad bowl called America. So, in accepting the multiplicity of traditions, the coexistence of traditions in a fundamental way, America is transforming in its core understanding of the place of religion, spirituality, etc. That's one way. The second way is the idea of spirituality. The consciousness. Being able to be silent, go into meditation, just sit quietly, calm the tempers down. After all, as you all know, temperamentally, America is very volatile, especially right now with all the shootings that are going on, the political crises, the unrest with the polarization in the community, and so on and so forth. There is a lot of instability, unrest, emotional disturbance that's going on, and really it reflects in schools, in colleges, all over the place. And the answer to this is not ultimately not give everybody a gun and let everybody have at it. That cannot be the answer. So the only way to find equilibrium and quiet and peace and contentment, focus on oneself and diffuse the tension within that each person is facing. And that idea, that going inward and finding a place within oneself where one can be at peace, one can be contented and accept the world as it is and embrace its diversity and plurality. These are definitely core values of Hindu Dharma, which are profoundly impacting this country, even if they don't explicitly acknowledge it. They are embracing it, and you can see it in the movies, like Avatar, like The Matrix, like Star Wars, the Force, may the Force be with you, and so on. I mean, these are ideas that are definitely coming from the East, and that's how I see it, as how it is slowly penetrating the mainstream consciousness of the West.
Yeah, if I could just add
Please.
a little bit to that, Darbhai. We actually covered this in the intro itself to the book, but specifically, there was an article in Newsweek magazine in 2009. The author was Lisa Miller, and she the title of that article was "We Are All Hindus Now." Now, that was based actually on and it drew a lot of controversy. That was discussed in media quite a lot. That was based on a 2008 survey of that was done in America. So she makes some very specific quantitative observations from that survey. In that, so allow me to just give you 2 or 3 of those statements from her article. So she says here. So she says America no longer is buying the concept that there is only one way to divinity, which is the Abrahamic way of thinking about divinity. She says that according to a 2008 Pew survey, 65% of the Americans believe that there are many ways to connect with divinity. Now, that is a quintessential Hindu idea. Now, she also points out in her article that, out of that 65%, 37% of them actually are evangelists. So that's a very interesting observation. Now, the other thing is nearly a third of North Americans are they don't bury their dead. They actually have a funeral. What you call it?
Cremation.
A cremation. Yeah. So they use the cremation process. Now, you might say, well, what is the significance of that? Well, the significance of that, as you I'm sure know, is that in the Abrahamic faith system, having the body available on the judgment day is extremely critical. I mean, that is whereas in Hindu belief, body is disposable after death, soul goes on. So this fact that 1/3 of the Americans are actually committing their dead is very, very significant, and it is very much comes from the Hindu thought system that says body is not useful to you anymore. And that is actually up from 6% in early 70s. So just imagine, so there are a lot of, and again, I should point out that we are not proselytizing, Hindu Dharma is not proselytizing Dharma. We don't ask anyone to, go through a conversion process. You can just take up good ideas, use them in your, daily life, and, you don't have to call yourself a Hindu. Those are just ideas to kind of run your life in a, more sort of a thoughtful way, consistent with, and, friendly with, with the nature and so on and so forth. So there are many different pieces of data. Yoga is now $80 billion industry. Meditation was the most popular term during 2 years of lockdown during COVID. As people were, developing these, I guess, personal anxieties, tension, so on and so forth. So I think their signs are there. You just have to, look at them and collate them, and we've tried to kind of tap into that sort of data in this book.
Who's the intended audience of this book? Hindu Americans? Are Americans? Are Hindus across the planet? Are Hindus in the Western world? So what is the precise audience for this book?
I like to think that it's all of the above. Of course, it's difficult for me to predict that the non-Hindu Americans would reach out for this book as a matter of course. But I think there are a lot of curious non-Hindu Americans and Canadians who might be interested in looking at how various thoughts in this is Hindu thought here, how various thoughts are coming and merging with with the native thought, with the Judeo-Christian thought system, and how they are changing the society, and what were they changing. So I think, as a matter of curiosity, they would probably want to look at it. But, I would be happy, and I'm sure Kalyanji would be happy if, every Hindu American family actually had the book at their coffee table, because it is, more than a conversation piece. My own generation should be interested in just knowing, taking a look at your own history. I think so. From that perspective, they should be interested in it. But our next generation should be interested in it, because it's the history of that made them what they are. Okay. And I would venture to say that even a 15-year-old can get a lot out of it. See, I look at, a 15-year-old, and what does he know about all the, things that have happened in the last 50 years? How this whole thing, is gone. I mean, they know us as parents, grandparents, uncles and aunts, doing our stuff, whatever that stuff is, engineers, doctors, whatever have you. But do they really get a sense of the accomplishment of their forefathers, their ancestors have achieved in that short span of time? So to conclude what I'm going to say, I mean, basically, I think it should appeal to everyone. But of course, it remains to be seen. I say, books and umbrellas, they have something in common. They don't work unless you open them. So I think buying a book is one thing, but actually opening and taking a look at it, I think is going to be a very rewarding experience to whosoever actually does open it.
Yeah, Jaybai, you said very well. Books are meant to read and ponder on. So, Kalyanji, as we see the contents of this book, there are three parts. Cultural heritage, part 1, and that part has many chapters. And then the part 2 is how Hindu thought influenced America, very important part, and that got couple of chapters. And then the part 3, perspectives of contemporary Hindu Americans, very, very important part. So how would you describe briefly what is covered in those chapters, in those parts in the book?
Okay, so maybe the first part, Jay Bansalji was primarily responsible. I will invite him to share, and maybe I can take a little bit time and explain the second part, and then we'll get to the third part after that. So Jayji, why don't you take the first shot?
Sure. Talking about the cultural heritage of any society, any community is obviously a pretty sizable task. We try to break it down into a number of value systems that we thought we could we could explore. So first and foremost, what is the basic Hindu thought system? I mean, people in the West a lot of times confused about what Hinduism is. They think of Murti Puja and believing in many gods and so on and so forth. But in reality, there is a very strong philosophical underpinning that is common to all those sampradayas, all those thought systems, and we try to distill that in the to start off as part of the cultural heritage. So it talks about the concept of Brahman, talks this the law of karma, the reincarnation, and what is a personal deity, Ishwar, and so on and so forth. So talk a little bit about what Hindu Dharma actually at the very root of it is. Then we talk about a very important subject that I think a lot of times doesn't get discussed, and that is the family system. See, we look upon society, family to us is the basic unit of a society, whereas in the Western world, individual is the basic unit of society. And I believe that our family value, our family system, is really the comparative advantage that Hindu Americans have had in this world. So we talk quite a bit about how that family works in practice, different generations sort of depend on each other for in different ways in carrying out their passing their traditions, and also in the process looking after the older generation in a very comfortable surroundings. And then we talk about some of the things like the milestones in life, what we call sanskars. We talk about some of the goals in life, that we talk about the various stages of life, and then the purusharthas, which is a dharma, artha, kama, moksha. A lot of people are familiar with them, but a lot of them don't realize how they connect into this ecosystem called Hindu Dharma. And we try to show also that Hindu Dharma is inherently pluralistic. You look at any of our scriptures, they talk about, they think well of everyone, not just a selected club of people. So, we try to give some excerpts from our scriptures to display that. Ahimsa is a very big aspect of it, and how it relates to not just vegetarianism and some of the other things and health and whatever have you, but also how it relates to eco-friendliness, how Hindu Dharma looks at nature having its own rights. And then, of course, we have deep reverence for knowledge. We call Guru Devo Bhava. Teacher is, equated to divine in our system. And so we have built a lot of rituals around acquisition of knowledge, and we talk about that. And then we talk about the system of knowledge that Hindu Dharma is based on. There are many pages, 6-7 pages just dedicated to that part. And talk about some of the ancient universities that unfortunately have been ruined by the various invaders, but they're coming back slowly but surely. And then what is very interesting is a number of quotes from very famous thought leaders in the West. We wanted to make sure that we did not include any Hindu thought leaders in here. We wanted to actually have this truth being spoken through the mouths of the Western thought leaders. So there are 30 different individuals who have said, things, observed things about Hindu Dharma that we have tried to include in here. And I'll just read maybe one of them, just so to get a sense of, just to give your audience a sense of what we're talking about. So here is Ralph Waldo Emerson. He's early 19th century. He says, "In the great books of India, an empire spoke to us, nothing small or unworthy, but large, serene, consistent, the voice of an old intelligence, which in another age and climate had pondered and thus disposed of the questions that exercise us today." So think of that. Think of Niels Bohr. He is from the early 20th century. He is a Nobel laureate physicist, and he says, "I go to Upanishads to ask questions." So, and the 30 like that. I don't want to go into all of them here. Then we talk about various civilizational contributions to mathematics, astronomy, to arts, to literature, to I mean, a pretty to technology and many and mind sciences in particular. And then so point being that in the cultural heritage part, we try to explore these different aspects of what makes up one's culture or civilization. Sorry, it's been a little bit long, dissertation, but let me turn the floor over to Kalyanji for further
Ji
explanation.
Kalyan ji, please.
Okay. So now that takes us to the part two of the book. Now, part two basically then takes a historical view, goes back in time to the days of the first books coming to America, and Americans being exposed to the notion of a higher consciousness, the higher spirituality, ideas of meditation, or knowing oneself, what we call Atma Jnana, right? Be still and know yourself. And ultimately life is about finding peace and quiet and contentedness in one's own life, which when we find that, we can share it with others. Otherwise it is always a conflict, so we have these two notions, a society that is constantly breeding on conflict, internal conflict. It develops using conflict as a mechanism to advance, and then there is the society which moves in the other direction towards an inward contentedness and peace. And that idea begins to resonate in America, even with the very early transcendentalist movements. And of course, Swami Vivekananda takes the whole country by storm in some ways. There's a new route, a new route begins to now flower. The Vedanta societies are set up in different parts of the country. There is the Hollywood Center of Vedanta. There is New York. And some of these places are still there, in Chicago and so on. All over there is a new sprouting of Hindu thought. Very soon yoga comes into America in the form of Paramahamsa Yogananda and self-realization fellowship. And yoga is immediately taken up in if you look at the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s. There's a phenomenon called J. Krishnamurti who comes to America, and he becomes another superstar amongst the elite in America. And they start to understand and assimilate an entirely new way of being. Instead of being outwardly focused, always trying to aggressively acquire and procure and accumulate, what if you let go and lived more lightly on the planet, and there is the notion that ultimately real happiness, real joy comes only from within. Now, there is no outer circumstance that can arrange things in such a way that one becomes absolutely and totally happy forever and ever after, never to be, disturbed in any way. The idea is we have to find an inner peace in the midst of all the turmoil that's going on, constantly going on. And we find that as time moves on, many more people come from India to the West. There is this whole place called Yogaville. There is Woodstock. There is the whole countercultural revolution of the 1960s. You might recall people like Osho, Rajneesh. He creates a huge storm in America, and all his work is based on meditation, tantra, dynamic meditation, and it has a big intersection with American culture. And of course, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, he's another phenomenon. He brings the Bhakti tradition, the singing and dancing on street corners, the prolific writings that he did on Krishna, Sri Krishna. The whole ISKCON movement takes root in America, and in fact, a lot of Americans are attracted to that. ISKCON is an international movement today in so many countries, largely powered by Westerners. In California, there's a place called Mount Madonna. I don't know if you've heard of that, Tahir Bhai. There is a beautiful little place in the mountains. I have been there. It was set in motion by one. I think it was called Swami Haridas, Yogi Haridas, and it is 100% managed and run by white Americans. 100%. It is a very flourishing community with all the characteristics of Hindu culture: vegetarianism, veganism, non-violence, meditation, yoga, Ayurveda, and a profound and deep embrace of the culture. They even have a Hanuman Mandir in the hills in California. Uh, it's a beautiful place. Like that, as you move forward, there are more and more people. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi is a pretty great phenomenon. He introduces transcendental meditation. He trademarks it and sets it in motion in the West. And so many Americans have meditated and embraced it and become very, people don't know this. There was a person called John Gray, Dr. John Gray, who wrote a book called Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. A very famous, popular book that took America by storm. I mean, he was a student of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and it's not very well known, but a lot of his ideas he collected and distilled into the book that he created. Our own time, we have our Deepak Chopra, who's quite a phenomenon these days. Then, of course, you had Indra Devi, a person called Eugenie Peterson, who born and raised in America. She went to India. She spent many years in Mysore, in the palace of the Maharaja in Mysore. She learnt yoga under the tutelage of Krishnamacharya, and she comes back and sets up the first few yoga studios in Hollywood, in California. Then there is this person called Magna Baptiste. They are a big a couple who popularize yoga for fitness and health and so on. And the movement goes on and on. And of course, everybody has heard of BKS Iyengar, who is a student of Krishnamacharya, and he travels all over the world, sets up his own brand of yoga, Iyengar Yoga, as he calls it. And millions of Americans, Westerners, Europeans have learned yoga directly from BKS Iyengar or some of his students, his son TKV, Desikachar, and others. So you see this tremendous explosion of yoga, thousands and thousands of yoga studios in every corner. I'm never, I'm never not amazed by seeing yet another yoga studio that calls itself Om Yoga, or some other name, Shiva Yoga or something like that, and the penetration is so deep and so pervasive that now there are arguments about, is yoga really Hindu? Can we take it over? Can we call it Christian yoga, Islamic yoga, Jewish yoga, and so on? So just like pizza has become everybody's food, yoga has now become everybody's property. So that kind of deep penetration that yoga has had is a real phenomenon. So this the second section of the book really takes that into a deeper consideration and chronicles the history of how that happened. There was a person called the people, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, created Star Wars, and around the concept of the Force, the Force. And you have the right side, the bright side of the Force, and then you have the dark side of the Force, right? Which comes from really their years they spent with a person called Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell was a great mythologist, really speaking, and he wrote a book called The Hero's Journey. And he himself, in fact, studied under the tutelage of one Ramakrishna Vedanta Society Swami in New York City. So the traces of how this transmission has occurred is documented in the section 2, and you when you find it showing up in a movie like Avatar, and you can see traces of Ramayana there, and you can see traces of Mahabharata in these stories, you know, and you wonder where are they getting it from? So it goes back to the slow transmission of Hindu thought and ideas that have come into the United States of America. Of course, I should not fail to mention the Beatles, who learned music, who fused Indian and Western music with Pandit Ravi Shankar, and so many other, Ustad Amjad Ali Khan, so many others who brought the musical traditions into the West and so on. So it's a very rich tapestry of what has happened. I mean, just one more thing I'll mention here. Yoga and meditation and Ayurveda are slowly getting integrated into contemporary medical diagnosis and treatment practices, where the idea of some kind of integrative medicine, where not only you engage in Western medicine, but also integrate certain practices from the East, particularly from India, are becoming more and more and more commonplace in the West. In fact, in Harvard and other universities, they have started studying the effects of yogas scientifically and systematically, documenting in the form of well-researched papers, clinical study, clinical data, and so on. And they are trying to actually demonstrate that these practices may have had an ancient origin, but they are very much relevant today and can be scientifically demonstrated to be valid and legitimate. So all of this is just the slow and powerful movement of Hindu thought into the West. That is how we are looking at that second section. And of course, the third section is from the conference, so Jayaji will be able to explain it wonderfully.
Yeah, I just want to say a little bit more on the second part, and so if you think of India and Hindu Dharma, three things immediately come to mind: spirituality, yoga, and meditation, right? And so everyone, whether people are now talking about yoga, Christian yoga, and appropriating some of these concepts, but reality is those three things are very distinct, and everyone knows that they are Hindu, coming from Hindu thought system. But what is not obvious are the other two chapters in part 2, which is the impact on what we call mind sciences and art and literature. For example, not very many people know that Carl Jung. Now, Carl Jung is one of the considered one of the pioneers after Sigmund Freud of modern psychology, psychology. He wrote a book on the psychology of Kundalini Yoga. He actually gave lectures on Kundalini Yoga. And I have a quote here from a professor of religious studies at University of Calgary, Harold Coward. He says, to Jung, the Indian understanding seemed a great advance on the common Western view that a person's character is a particular admixture of blessings or curses which the fate or gods bestow on the child at birth. So his thought system is very much influenced by Hindu thought system. So, there is a tremendous amount of contribution to modern science of psychology and psychiatry. And of course, many of these thoughts have been taken up and modified slightly, or the name is being changed slightly so that, attribution does not have to go back to, Hindu sources. But there is a tremendous, writing this book actually was not just, a way to, it's not a one-way communication. We also learned a lot in the process of researching. We learned a lot about, some of these contributions. So yeah, there is a lot here in that system. Let me tell you a little bit about. So there's let me see here. Yeah, so there is Herbert Benson. he took meditation and he called it the relaxation response. It became his trademark. People, so that people don't know it is coming from meditation, but that's the genesis of it. You have something called mindfulness-based stress reduction technique by this fellow John Kabat-Zinn. That comes from the same place. So there is a lot more than meets the eye, and it's not just limited to yoga and spirituality. It's just a lot more than that. I was personally actually pleasantly surprised at the amount of contribution that Hindu thought has actually made to the Western literature. Third part of the book, as we pointed out a little bit earlier, is actually about you and I. It's our story in a way. Told through the voices of these 60 odd thought leaders that came to the conference and talked about their journeys and their life contributions. So first of all, it talks about actually the history of immigration. I didn't know that until early 1960 there were only 12,000 Hindus in North America. 12,000. Today in America alone is 4.5 million. I think there is about 750,000 million now in Canada. So, and then there are a lot of people who came from not from India. So it's much larger. So from 12,000 to how we got to the 7-8 million figure is an interesting journey. It came in many waves, and we try to sort of give a flavor of how that happened, and then how we obviously look different, but we have integrated ourselves very well into the society. How that integration took place, not only in the professional spaces, but also in everyday social interactions. How did it become commonplace for a American to want to go to an Indian restaurant or buy from Indian grocery stores, or Indian music is not strange anymore in the Western spaces. So how did that all happen? I mean, there is a process, and we try to capture a piece of that process. Then talking specifically about the conference itself, we had the conference was divided, if I going from memory, I think 8 or 9 different panels. There were people from the business world and entrepreneurs, artists, people from healthcare industry, and so there was one panel that was a youth panel. We had story of 8 or 9 young people talk about how they see their place in this world, in the Western world. And I'll just give you a couple of quotes. Here is a young lady, her name is Ananya Pati. She is, I think now she is probably a junior college. At that time she was, I think, a senior, high school senior. And she says, more and more youth is coming to realize that they are not the leaders of tomorrow. They are leaders of today, she said. And let me tell you, she has been recognized for her work as a leader in fighting drug abuse in schools and colleges. And she's traveled all over the world, showing how she's fought it, and teaches others to do the same. And then, of course, we had some thought leaders like yourself as well, Tahir Gora ji, and we had Rajiv Malhotra ji there. Give us a very broad perspective on our place in the Hindu society and how they see us continuing to carve a new path as we go forward. And it's just so it's really catching the voice of these thought leaders from different domains that makes up part 3 of the book. I mean, here we have some entrepreneurs that they talk about their journey. I mean, these people have, these are, these are people who have started many industries, employed, thousands, in some cases hundreds of thousands of people. They started from scratch, serial entrepreneurs, talking about what values drives them to start these businesses. It's not all about that's one thing. It was invariably, they keep coming back to that. It was their Hindu tradition, Hindu value system that drove them to, and that is how they conduct their business in daily life. It's not always profit motive. It's actually looking at a much broader perspective. So, it was actually very refreshing to get that perspective living in America, where, I mean, rat race is an everyday thing. Just hearing these people talk about, some very profound things that they do in their daily life, and these are people like you and I. So that's what part 3 of the book is about.
Oh, wonderful. Kalyanji, before I conclude today's discussion with Jay by asking a question, how can our audience get this book? I would like to have your conclusive remarks on our today's discussion, please.
Wonderful. So, Tahir bhai, see, I want to contextualize it in this way. See, when two different civilizations come into contact with each other, that contact can be very destructive, or it can be very potentially very constructive and contributory. We all know that when the West came into contact with the non-Western societies, the colonial era, that was a violent, very destructive engagement. The whole world was brought under the umbrella of colonialism, colonial conquest. And we all know the story of North America, where the natives of North America were literally exterminated and moved into reservations. Somewhere between 50 to 80 million of them died to make way for the American civilization to flourish here. Similarly, Latin America was totally colonized. Africans were taken as slaves, bought and sold as though they were animals. India was colonized. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Singapore, you name it, everything was brought under the heel of the Western colonial powers. That is one way of engagement, a contact between civilizations. What we are talking about in this book is another model of civilizational engagement. But quietly, silently, without any coercion, ideas from the Hindu world, Hindu cosmology, have slowly diffused like an agarbatti, like you put a little agarbatti in corner of a room, and then it slowly moves around and penetrates the atmosphere. Like that. It's completely non-violent and completely undirected, meaning there's nobody directing it. You see, nobody is controlling it. No, there's no West India Company or something like that, which is powering this movement, right? It is happening on its own, on the merit of the power of the ideas. It is diffusing and influencing the Western world, and therefore the entire world. So I think that's the real story of how to engage the world gently, without coercion, on the strength and merit of the ideas, concepts, values, which we can contribute and share with the world. That's the story that the book really captures. I will conclude on that note.
Oh, thank you very much for sharing very refreshing thoughts about this book. today with our viewers. So finally, Jay Bansal ji, I would like to ask, and our viewers would like to know, how can they get a copy of this book online, e-form, or in the store? How could they get a copy of this book? And I know this book is being published by Garuda Prakashan, Garuda Publishers. Please tell our viewers, Jay Bansal ji.
Yeah, correct, Tahir. It's been published by Garuda Prakashan, which is out of Delhi area, Gurugram to be exact. So it's listed on Amazon India right now, but viewers in North America can still get a copy of the book. It'll eventually, get listed on Amazon US as well. I think the publisher has some negotiations going on with them that haven't concluded, but in the meantime, they can order it from my organization. We have a number of copies available, and rather than me reading out the email address, I think if you wouldn't mind just displaying it on the screen. It's avm@vhp-america.org. But please display it on the screen, and and we'll be happy to send you a copy of the book. It's $50, but per copy. It's and it's all we have actually signed off our rights to our respective organizations. I'm part of the VHPA, and Kalyanji, of course, is part of Hindu University of America. So any proceeds from the book go directly to these organizations. It's not meant to be a profit generator for either one of us. So please, and I just want to also before we drop off, I just want to read a couple of lines by some prominent people in in our society who have written a couple of nice lines about the book. I thought your audience might want to know. So Dr. Subhash is very well known to most Hindus in North America as well as the rest of the world. He says it's a beautifully produced book that presents many aspects of the Indian experience in America and contributions of Indians to American life. And Professor Vednanda is he's a tall figure in the Hindu diaspora here, and he's written a pretty long paragraph, but I'll just read one line here. He says this book should adorn every Hindu American's coffee table. So I think with that thought, thank you for for giving us the opportunity to talk about what is feels like actually a baby, our baby, but now we're sending this baby out into the world to be on its own, and hopefully it'll find its right place in the world and stand on its own feet.
Thank you very much, Jay Bansal ji. Thank you very much, Kalyan ji, for writing this book, first of all. And secondly, thank you for your time today, participating in our show. And I'm pretty confident that this book will create a buzz in our community, not just in our community, in our broader society, what we call North America. So Canada and America both welcome your book, and we are eager to read this book. Thank you very much for joining us today. व्यूज़ बातचीत सुन रहे थे आप हिंदुइज्म एंड अमेरिका, एक बहुत ही बढ़िया बुक है। ये सिर्फ बुक ही नहीं है, एक डॉक्यूमेंट्री है, और जो पूरे का पूरा हिंदू समाज का अमेरिका में पर्सपेक्टिव है वो आपको इसमें पढ़ने को मिलेगा। और इस बुक का सब टाइटल है हाउ हिंदू धर्मा ट्रांसफॉर्मिंग द वेस्ट। इस बुक को आप बाय कीजिए, इस बुक को पढ़िए। स्क्रीन पे आपको हम बार बार दिखाते रहे हैं कि इस बुक को बाय कैसे किया जा सकता है। इस बुक पे आने वाले दिनों में और बातचीत होगी। जैसा कि मैंने कहा, ये सिर्फ बुक ही नहीं बल्कि पूरे का पूरा इतिहास है और पूरे का पूरा फ्यूचर है हिंदू धर्म का अमेरिका के अंदर। आज की इस बुक पर बातचीत देखने और सुनने का बहुत शुक्रिया। और इसके साथ साथ आप हमारे YouTube के चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करना चाहें तो आप सब्सक्राइब कर सकते हैं। अगर आप हमें डोनेट करना चाहें तो इसी YouTube के चैनल पे डोनेट के बटन को क्लिक करेंगे तो आप हमें पैट्रियन, पेपॉल और क्रेडिट कार्ड के राਹੀਂ कंट्रीब्यूट भी कर सकते हैं।
Subscribe Tag TV YouTube channel and press the notification button.